All right, I'm going to make sure this is recording real quick. Perfect. Oops. Okay, my name is Jack Goldstrom, and today I'm going to be giving you a presentation on Alfred Marshall's theory of elasticity of demand. Now, this is one of the most crucial theories to the subject of microeconomics. However, it's also one of the more simple theories as well. So I hope through today's presentation you gather much better understanding of what the theory of elasticity of demand means, but it also shouldn't be too hard to grasp and understand. Okay, so what is the elasticity of demand? Well, uh, I guess the proper way to explain it is what I have written down right here. Elasticity of demand measures how the quantity demanded for a good or service responds to its change in price. So, in other words, consumers are very responsive to changes in price for elastic goods, but not very responsive in changes in price for inelastic goods. So, to understand this, we need to understand what an elastic good is and what an inelastic good is. An elastic good is a good or service that um, has a large variety of substitutes. For example, if you go to your local Walmart and you want to go and buy a new laptop computer uh, for your new business job that you've acquired, you have a lot of different options to choose from. You have Dell, you have HP, you have Apple. So you're going to be very receptive to the price of that product. If Apple is charging you $2,000 for a laptop, but HP is only charging you 700, that's going to significantly affect your purchasing behavior. Now, on the other hand, inelastic goods are goods that usually are essential goods and don't have many substitutes. For example, let's say there's a large number of hikers on a hiking trail in the desert. And in the desert, out here somewhere in New Mexico or Arizona or somewhere that's very hot, on this hiking trail, there's one one concession stand that sells bottles of water. Now, let's say the average price for an Aquafina bottle of water, that's, just the average size bottle is $2. Let's say at this concession stand, they're charging $7. Quite a large markup of what the average price is. Those hikers are going to be very receptive to buying the $7 bottle of water because they have no other substitutes out there in the desert, and they have a very high demand for water as of course they're very thirsty and really need something to drink out in this hot desert. So I hope that gives you a good understanding of what inelastic and elastic goods are. So elasticity of demand is an important concept because it gives businesses important information about how they can set prices and maximize revenues. So obviously, a business owner understanding whether or not they're selling elastic or inelastic good is going to affect their pricing model significantly. And um, excuse me, I'm blanking, the equation. Thank you. The equation for this is right up here. So price elasticity of demand equals percentage change in quantity divided by percentage change in price. And the economist that pioneered this theory was Alfred Marshall. Alfred Marshall was alive in the late 19th century, and that's when he began most of his findings. And we'll talk about him right now. So Alfred Marshall authored the book Principles of Economics in 1890, introducing important concepts like supply and demand, marginal utility, and the price of elasticity of demand, which we're talking about today. So this book, Principles of Economics from 1890, was very influential from its time. For its time. The elasticity of demand really started gaining traction, becoming more popular in the 1870s. So this is still not a brand new theory, but a relatively new theory. If you imagine that by the mid 1870s, people started economists started, you know, figuring out this breakthrough about the elasticity of demand. So this the theory might have only been, I won't say it didn't exist up until that point, but it had been, popularized for maybe 15 years or a little bit more, a little bit less. So this is a very influential book for its time. And yes, he developed the concept of elasticity of demand to measure how the quantity demanded for a good responds to its change in price. He did this because he found the approach of many classical economists, such as David Ricardo and Adam Smith, to be very flawed, because they believed that a price of a good was largely determined by the labor it took to produce that good. So, yeah, nothing to add to that. I think that explains it pretty well, actually, what's written down there. Yep, uh, to expand on that further, if I can. So, classic economists believe pretty much, yeah, exactly that the price of a good is going to be determined by the amount of labor that it took to produce that good. If it takes a lot of expensive materials, a lot of labor to produce a good, it's going to be more expensive. If it takes less, then it's going to be less expensive. But then uh, Alfred Marshall and other economists that were, starting to, they started to realize that, this is too vague. And the elasticity of demand theory kind of brought a new light. This thought that, told economists, hey, uh, consumers are going to have a higher demand for certain products that have less substitutes, and yeah, a higher demand for products that have more substitutes. So we can kind of play with the pricing model based on that. And elasticity of demand in itself, just based on that, is still relatively vague. um, but it's simple enough to give businesses and producers a good understanding of the price of what pricing model they should go for, and it's also more descriptive than the classic economist theories. So up here we have some of his accomplishments. So he trained in mathematics at Cambridge. Discovered economics by reading J.S. Mill. 1877, he got married, and returned to Cambridge in 1844 and established an economics program there. Wrote his book Principles of Economics in 1890, and Industry and Trade in 1919. Um, so the factors that affect elasticity of demand. So more substitutes make demand more elastic. You know, that's pretty self-explanatory. If a consumer has a wide variety of options, it's really easy for a new product to get lost in the mix if the product they've released is, being introduced into a very oversaturated market. So that definitely affects the demand of that good, and they really need to consider their pricing model more thoughtfully, I guess might be the best way I can explain it. They really might want to consider marking their price as low as they possibly can while still turning a, you know, feasible profit, whatever their goal is for that, specific product. So necessities tend to have inelastic demand while luxuries are more elastic. This isn't true in every case. There can be inelastic goods necessities that are more elastic than inelastic, like food, for example. You know, uh, just in the United States, and maybe not in other places, but in the United States, we have a wide variety generally of different, brands of food and drink to select. But it also depends on, yeah, where you are, what the demand is for it. Again, back to the hikers in the desert example. And luxuries are more elastic. That's pretty much always the case. Um, there's never going to be a urgent need for a luxury good like a supercar or something like that. So in the long run, In the long run, demand tends to be more elastic as consumers find alternatives. And this is because over a long period of time, consumers have more substitute goods to choose from, unlike in the short run where they generally have fewer options. Okay, so yep, nothing I want to add to that. And up here we have the different graphs here of elastic and inelastic goods. So we see right here in elastic demand, the gap in price is quite large. It's very much tightened in inelastic demand, and then perfectly inelastic demand, meaning there are literally no substitutes, is completely vertical. Okay, so the real world application of elasticity of demand. So yeah, businesses use elasticity to optimize pricing by setting higher prices for inelastic goods where demand is less sensitive to price changes. In contrast, businesses price down for elastic goods where demand is much more sensitive to price changes. So yeah, that's common sense, right? Like if there's no substitutes, and not even if there's no substitutes, but even if there's very few substitutes and you're the only shop in town, you know, obviously businesses, the entire point of a business is to make money unless it's a nonprofit. But, majority of the time, goal of business is to make money. That's not the only reason to own a business, obviously. But if you're if you're a business owner and your goal isn't to make money, you're in the wrong field of work. So, um, that's just common sense. If there's not many competitors, set the price higher. You can make a larger profit. But if there are a wide variety of competitors, price down. That way, people will buy your product. Better to, make a profit off of an item for less than you could if you had marked up higher. Then no one buy it and mark it up high because your competitor has a lower price for essentially the same good. And that can change based on other variables, like if maybe your product is at a higher price, but it offers better features than your competitors. Then that gives consumers obviously incentive to buy the more expensive good, even if there are substitutes. But just in general, if there are two items that are pretty much the same, consumers are going to try to go for the cheaper one. So elastic goods, um, for example, yeah. So some examples of elastic goods and inelastic goods. So examples of elastic goods are movie tickets, smartphones, name branded clothing. All of those have a ton of substitutes. And inelastic goods could be medicine, gasoline, food. Again, these can depend, but these are necessities. These are things that people will always need to buy. So now we're going to look at criticisms of the theory. So one criticism is it assumes consumers have perfect information, that they are fully aware of all available options in the market. So yeah, saying that demand is, if when we're looking at supply and demand and kind of putting it in a box and only focusing on price, on whether or not a consumer will buy it or if they will not buy it, can be flawed because they might there might be products that are cheaper that the consumer doesn't even know about. Like maybe like back to the Apple and HP example. Yeah, maybe HP is $700 for a new laptop and a new Apple MacBook is $2,000. But let's say hypothetically HP is kind of obviously it's not, but hypothetically let's say that it's more of a uh, business that's not as well known about and doesn't have as much advertising as Apple does. The consumer might not even know that that cheaper alternative exists. So that kind of creates a problem when we're only looking at price for the demand for a good. It completely ignores consumer preferences. Yep, obviously, again, that goes back to what a certain product might have features that a consumer really likes and fits their needs, while there might be a similar product that has either less features or different features that don't meet the consumer's needs. And so even if one is cheaper than the other, but it doesn't really fit their situation as well, they're going to go with a more expensive product because it fits their needs or their specific situation better than the cheaper alternative. So it also does not take into account other factors that affect demand, such as changes in consumer income and the cost of production. Yep. So if generally people's incomes are going up and they have more buying power and more money to spend, they're not always going to go for those cheaper goods, because cheaper goods are usually what we like to call in economics inferior goods, or normal, not normal goods, inferior goods. So like ramen noodles, for example, they are 33 cents. You can buy them for real cheap. They make you full, but it's not the most high quality food. But consumers will go for the ramen noodles and buy that if they're on a tight budget. But if their income goes way up, then they're not going to be buying ramen noodles as much. Now they're going to be buying sirloin steaks and those more expensive foods because it's of higher quality, and they prefer that. Now that they have more buying power, they no longer have a need for the ramen noodles. And I have on here, it's much too broad. I think I meant to say it's much too vague. Uh, yeah, so it the so elasticity of demand focuses on an economic term that's called ceteris paribus, which in short that means that when we're looking at something like supply and demand, for example, ceteris paribus goes under the notion that we're only looking at one factor and holding everything else constant. And that's what elasticity of demand is. It is only looking at the change in price, but it's not looking at any other variables, which makes it much too vague and makes it very limited in how much we can actually take away from that. And so that's just a big issue that it has. It's a great tool for getting a general idea of the demand for a good, but it doesn't give you all the information that you need. And it's also nice in the fact that it's simple, it's easy to understand. But yeah, so that's definitely a valid criticism of that. So now we're going to be looking at some key takeaways, or kind of something to close us out here. So Marshall's theory of elasticity of demand is crucial for understanding consumer demand and pricing strategies. Yep, absolutely. Elasticity varies depending on several factors, including the availability of substitutes and the nature of the good. Yep, we talked about that with elastic and inelastic goods. And elasticity of demand can be a useful tool for better understanding the supply and demand curve. However, realize that it does have some drawbacks and follows ceteris paribus. Excuse me, stumbling over my words a bit there. But yep, uh, is definitely a useful tool, but also take it with a grain of salt and realize that there are plenty of other variables that it does not take into account. Okay, well, I've been talking for 18 minutes now, so I'm gonna let you all go. I really appreciate you staying this long to watch the video, and I hope you learned something. And if you have any questions for me, don't be shy to leave a comment or anything like that, and I'll do my best to answer. So thank you very much, and I hope you all have a wonderful day.